Father. You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California, I'm Krista.
I'm Kristen.
And we are
the Sixth Sense Society.
Welcome to another episode of the Sixth Sense Society. Tonight we are going to be talking about the tarot and about misunderstood cards, at least from our point of view. But before we get going, we're going to have Michael do a couple announcements.
Hi guys, I'm totally looking forward to the show tonight. I think it's going to be awesome. And of course, tarot is a passion for all of us. And for those of us listening out there, we have between us, all three of us, 60 years or 70 years of experience. So, and 50, 60,000 readings. So hopefully you guys will benefit from some of our knowledge. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we think are very, misunderstood in the cards, the tarot, and so forth. So hopefully you guys will love that. We have a couple of shows coming up. Next week will be Signs and Synchronicities, and so that's going to be fun. We'll be looking at sort of all that stuff, and I know that's a big part of tarot as well as synchronicity, but we're going to look at all kinds of different aspects of that. End of the month, we're not going to have a regular show, but we're going to have our Cosmic Weather since there's 5 Sundays in this month, and we're getting older. We need a little break now and again. And then lastly, beginning of July, the first Sunday is Krista's dad again, Dr. George Schwimmer, and he's going to be talking about spirit attachments. And he's been working with that for, gosh, how long, 50, 60 years. So if you guys are interested in that, that's something to tune in for as well. A quick thank you to everybody who's subscribing to our channel. It's just awesome to get the support. We've had some great comments too, and we love that. So if you have thoughts on our show, what you like, what you don't like, let us know, and we're happy to engage in a little discussion. And Krista's going to do her best to monitor the live chat tonight too. So if you're listening live and you want to chat with us, and you have questions, let us know, and we'll see if we can make that happen also. So that's kind of the stuff that I've got. So to kick it off, there's 2 cards that I think that we all agree are very misunderstood, and that's the 3 of Swords and the 9 of Swords. So we're going to talk about those first, and swords in general. So I'm going to kick it back to you guys, and we'll get into it.
Okay, I'm going to give a brief description of what they look like for you fellas and ladies that'll be listening on the podcast and don't know anything about these cards. So the 3 of Swords is simply, and we're using the Waite deck since that's one of the most famous visuals. So it's a big red heart with 3 swords stabbing through the heart, and there's a dark background. It's kind of rainy in the background. The 9 of Swords is probably one of the most famous images. It's a figure sitting up in a bed, and the bed is kind of austere. It's basically got the face is buried in the hand, so you can't really see what the face looks like. And there's this very neat, beautiful quilt, and it's decorated with astrological signs and roses. And then in the background, you have the 9 swords, and they're all like in a row, very neatly arranged. And that's the 9 of Swords. So I want to start with the 3 of Swords. So first of all, we're going to be looking at this, Michael and I should say, from a Kabbalistic point of view. And that really does make a difference than just the symbolism. And tarot there's no real one way to read symbolism. That's true. Or allegories. But one of the problems with many people who read the cards is they literally look at the 3 of Swords and go, oh my God, that's terrible. That's just a horrible thing and something bad is going to happen. And it's I've never thought like that. Well, maybe in the beginning I did a little bit because it is such a strong visual. Mm-hmm. So 3s are part of Binah, which is the 3rd Sephirah in the Kabbalah, and that's connected to the Great Mother. And it's part of the left-hand pillar, which is a pillar associated with the feminine. And so the Great Mother, more sort of in her sort of maybe, I wouldn't say dark form, because the Virgin Mary can be associated, even because of the 3 of Swords imagery, is an imagery associated with the Virgin Mary. So basically, all 3s, if you look at all the 3s, they look like they're not quite clear. So threes are cards of questioning things. And there's three of swords can be questioning either something that's happening or thoughts or things that have happened. And of course, when we don't have answers, it makes us all a little nervous. So the shadow side of the left-hand path in general, which is threes, fives, and eights, they can have a little anxiety towards them because they're dealing a little more with the unknown. And so threes ask questions. The low end of the three of swords to me is people can be very reactive. So think about, how a person doesn't really listen sometimes, or there's hearsay. Threes can be cards of triangulation, and people just react without really knowing. So the three starts up a process that we'll later talk about that the queen completes in Kabbalah, in that, it's looking at, it's questioning things, and it's looking in the three of swords, like I said, is looking at either thoughts or even actions. And also one of the lessons of Binah is understanding. And so you could even just look at that visual honestly, symbolic, and see, it's you can look at it as compassion, that compassionate heart that feels, other people's pain. But for whatever reason, people interpret it in a lot of readings as that you're going to suffer or something's going to turn out wrong. And I just don't usually see it quite like that at all in readings. Threes can be the beginnings of issues if we do have cards in a pattern of problems, but it's really not at all as negative, really. I mean, I wouldn't, it's neither positive or negative. It's all about the context of the cards. So that's a little bit, and also the three is in the Kabbalah, that sphere, Sephirah, is associated with Saturn, the planet Saturn. And so those are some things to think about with the imagery. What are your thoughts, Kristen?
Well, it's interesting because in the three, it can be very much about, like you said, the beginnings of something. So when a lot of times when people see in a relationship reading, for example, the three, oh, does that mean we're going to break up? Does it mean that something horrible is going to happen? And it just depends on what cards are next to it and in what context. It could actually be very much, for me, I have found in readings to be a card of healing, depending on what's next to it. Now, it could certainly indicate perhaps a breakup or a misunderstanding that could domino effect into something. But again, I really think it's hard to look at just individual cards as tarot when you're into tarot, when you read tarot, because the combination is just so important. So I don't really recommend one card readings a day. I know it's kind of popular for people to just pick a card, and maybe if you have an oracle card deck that you really love, certainly you can with that, but I would be hesitant to just tell anybody to pick, because you get the three of swords and you look at that image, you're like, oh my God. It could simply mean that you're just going to have a simple misunderstanding with someone that needs to happen. Maybe a misunderstanding needs to happen in order for something to get taken care of, for something to actually be spoken about. And it's a little uncomfortable, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean that the misunderstanding is going to lead to something completely terrible. So.
If I can talk just briefly about the left-hand pillar in general. And these are the cards, the threes, the fives, the eights, the chariot, the hangman, the judgment card, regardless of suit. The real thing with the left-hand pillar that people don't understand is that it's really all about coming to acceptance, accepting our past, making peace with it. And it really is the big question of the left-hand pillar, I always say, is, are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want? It demands certainty. And the left-hand pillar sort of connects to the past and the idea that it's unchangeable and we have to accept it. You can't really change your past. So, and sometimes people really struggle with that. We've seen that in readings where people have a hard time letting go of things or accepting things. And that's really what the left-hand pillar is all about. And if you refuse to accept it, that's where it kind of punishes you, if you will. That's where it gets very difficult because you keep butting your head against it. And it's eventually going to, realize that you have no other choice. You have to accept it, that there's just nothing else to do with it. I also think that pillar and those cards in particular, to make them positive, and every card has a positive element, it really is about the idea of acceptance in a positive way. This is the pillar of marriage. This is the idea of committing to someone, of saying, you're the person I want, and you're the person I'm going to commit to, and I'm going to forsake all others. I'm not going to be interested in anyone else. I'm with you. And so it really is all about sort of that idea of acceptance, both positive and negative in connotation. I accept something difficult and I make peace with it, or I accept something positive, and I commit to it. And I always tell people the story that when it comes to the left-hand pillar of the lady I read for once, who was dressed very simply, and I thought was, and all these left-hand pillar energies. And I assume maybe she was a starving artist. Well, it turns out she was a very famous musician who I'm not going to mention names because we don't like to talk about our clients, especially on air. But it was somebody that with Grammy Awards that everybody would recognize. And I realized that with the left-hand pillar, it was all about her saying, look, I'm not interested in doing karaoke. If I'm going to do this, I'm all in. I'm going to really sort of commit to this path, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make it successful. And so she did great, but she's very committed to what she's doing. And that's really what the 3s and the 5s and the 3 of Swords, are you sure this is what you want to do? And then I wanted to mention something else briefly, and I'll kick it back to you guys, is the 4 suits, because I think they get so misunderstood. And I'm so tired of hearing that discs are money and cups are relationships. It's not quite that simple. Wands have to do with self. So whenever we're looking at those cards, we're talking about the evolution of self or the change of self. Who am I? Cups have to do with one's situation or circumstance in life. So do I know the right people? Is this the right person? Is this the right situation? Do I live in the right place? Are the conditions correct? So it's that external energy. The swords are what we say and do and experience. It's the actions. And then discs are the manifestation suits, the idea of result and who I am, where I am, what I do, and what I have. There are only 4 things in the universe. It describes everything. And that's why there's not 3 or 5 suits, there's 4. So with the swords, again, people so see it as sort of problems and horrible things. And without that suit, nothing ever happens. You can never do anything. So it's not really that at all. So I'll kick it back to you guys.
Well, what's interesting, I decided to go back, and one of the earliest essays that describes some of the meanings of the cards is this French essay that was not translated in 2002 from the French, which is amazing to me. And this fellow Carlin, he looked for the translation, couldn't find it, so he did it. And it's called Rhapsodies of the Bizarre. That's his translation, the Tarot Essays of Anton Court de Gebelin and Le Comte de Millet. So these were the 2 essays that started the whole occult movement. And I looked it up, and I've read it before, but I looked up some of the definitions again. And one of the things about the suits was they each represented a class of people originally. So the cups were actually the priest and the clergy, and the discs were merchants, the wands were agriculture, and the swords were military and nobility. And so, over the time, the suits have kind of, changed into different things, but that was sort of what they thought, and it was based on what they perceived as the Egyptian system, caste system, if you want to call it. So it's really interesting to see that's what it could have meant. And they also have some other really odd ideas about the suits and the numbered cards that connect to geography, which is too much to go into this time. So a lot of people haven't read that essay, even I think in the tarot movement. And there's another essay, there's some other books that haven't been translated out of French that also influenced Waite and Crowley, and that was Atelier's books. And he was one of the first professional fortune tellers, actually, and that was later on. So I agree with, pretty much what Michael was saying about, the suits themselves. And if you look at like the cups, a cup is a container, it's not, how can, and a container can be an opportunity or a person, it's not, it doesn't quite make sense when you think of the actual, the suit is called the cup. So I think that's very true about the suits being misunderstood. And then the other thing about the swords in general, it depends on where they're at, what number they're at. They can be thoughts, ideas, or actions. And many people do see that nowadays as the swords. When I first started reading, I'll never forget, I was doing a reading for this young woman who was going to graduate. And I remember she had the 9 and 10 of swords. And I was going on about how challenging her life was and all these like words that were very sword-like. It was very early on in my career. And she was looking at me like I was like an alien. And afterwards, years later, I thought about it. And basically I think she had it like in order to the 9 and 10 of swords. She was successfully doing all the things she needed to do to complete and graduate on time. That was it. 10s being ending,
Yes.
and there was nothing. You can tell from her reaction that she, people react and go, yeah, I'm going through blah, blah. And she wasn't. She's just looking at me like I was completely wrong. And I was. And so even then I rethought my ideas. I said, okay, this isn't really happening. It's not working. And one of the things that I will absolutely say, if you don't do enough readings you're not going to see what works and what doesn't work because if let's say the Three of Swords does represent to me pain every time, and maybe for me because it symbolizes that whenever I do a reading for myself it will be that. But what we're trying to do with the tarot when we read for others is tap into the collective unconscious, not our own personal symbolism, which is still very valid. And you're not going to find that certain things hold up. They just really don't. Nine of Swords is another great example of that. The first thing Michael and I always do when we see any tarot books is look and see what they say about the Nine of Swords. A lot of the descriptions are very dated about the tarot, and I'm not sure why, because even astrology has evolved over the hundreds of years. They see Saturn differently than they did 100 years ago. Saturn isn't all evil now. And I feel the tarot is a dynamic system that reflects our consciousness, and we need to reinterpret it. And this is the era that we are meant to be challenging these very dated interpretations. So the Nine of Swords, if you read it in any book, you will want to jump off a cliff if you get it in a card reading. It's death, it's ruin, it's destruction. Even reversed, it's bad. And that seems a little odd. So basically in the Kabbalah and also numerology, if you're working with a system, the nines are all very similar energies. It's true that nines are close to endings in numerology, and even in the tree, they're close to the bottom of the tree. But if you're going to say they represent death, which I don't necessarily agree they do, then that means they all could be death, not just the Nine of Swords. So because it's part of the middle pillar, and the way Michael and I see the middle pillar of the Kabbalah is it's part of like destiny, and it's also very balanced and truthful. So one way you can see the Nine of Swords is necessity, and doing the things that you have to do, whether you want to do it or not. Michael once pointed out that, I'll let you describe why you use the figure with the face and the hands, what you think about that, because I thought it was a really astute observation that I hadn't heard anybody talk about from the weight deck. And the people say that this person is distraught, and Michael will tell you what he thinks about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. the whole idea, if you look at it Kabbalistically, the center pillar is the pillar of first of all, being in the moment, but it's also the pillar of truth, to serve the higher good, to do the right thing. And swords, we know, are actions. We know that the nine is a manifestation, or in the process of manifestation, because it's very low on the tree, so it becomes not a thought or an idea, but an actual occurring event, has some body. And so the Nine of Swords, all it really means is to do the right thing, or to do what's best. Now, the reason the face is covered by the hands is that the face is the mirror of the emotions. And so by covering the face, it says, don't consider the feelings. The feelings don't matter. This could break your heart. This could make you happy. It doesn't really matter. It's just about doing the right thing. So if you're happy, great. You're still doing the right thing. And if you're sad, well, take comfort in the idea that you're doing the right thing. So the bed is representative of comfort, the idea that you're supposed to be comforted if you're going through a difficult time. And even the swords being in a perfect order, the idea that there's an order to things, there's a reason, there's why things are happening the way that they are, and this will be for the best. And that's all the Nine of Swords means. It's one of my favorite cards, and yet people say all these horrible things about it. So back to you guys.
It's really true. And one of the things I find, now one of the things, this is an aside about doing readings, some of the observations I've made, if someone gets a lot of cards from the middle pillar is very much in the moment. It's very present. It's very much now. I have to admit, there does seem to be some things that actually you're not meant to know even. And this is just my own observation. I've noticed that if they get a lot of nines and sixes, and it even feels like there's this kind of veil, and this is where working with patterns, you start getting feelings about the patterns. You're like, there sure is a lot from this particular pillar. I wonder why that is, and how do I feel? The colors, the symbols. One of the reasons to use a deck that's based on tarot symbolism is they've thought out the colors very deliberately so that they have an effect in terms of producing a result in making you feel a certain way about each of the cards and the Sephira. And it's why I'm a big proponent of using a traditional tarot deck of some kind, and not these wild sometimes beautiful versions. Like I have the Blake tarot, but it's really not a tarot deck, but I love it. It's a beautiful because I love Blake. So you can collect those, but if you really want the benefit of letting the cards teach you because of the symbols and the colors and the numbers, they really start working on your subconscious, and you start getting ideas even not related to the book or to Kabbalah exactly, that are based on truth though. So nines especially have this kind of sort of effect on me when there's a lot of nines. And the other thing about, to me, the middle pillar can have sometimes a lot of protective energy. So once I was reading for a man at a party, and he had the 4 nines surrounding his center card, which is called the significator, and it literally glowed. It was so beautiful, and I've never seen that since, because getting 4 of a kind is rare even in a tarot reading. And I looked at him and I said, "You must be really protected in your life." And he said, "My mother prays for me every day."
Aw.
And I thought, that is amazing that it came through the tarot. I said, that woman must be really strong. So sometimes there's a kind of spiritual element for me with the nines and the sixes in the middle pillar.
Just to quickly move on, I know that Kristen was a big fan of talking about the lovers tonight, so let's move on to that one, and we'll kick it over to Kristen for her thoughts on that particular card.
The lovers. Who doesn't love the lovers? And you get the lovers in your spread, and you think, my God, love is coming to me. And it could, but it's interesting because I was reading the history of tarot, and the lovers was originally going to be called the choice. And so often it could be about a choice. There are two people in there if you look at the visual. So, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just a choice between two people. It could be a choice about anything creative, anything about value. When I think of the lovers, it's Gemini. So it could be, Gemini and the twins. It could be two aspects of a person and trying to reconcile. Well, my boss has these two different sides to him, or my husband has this two different sides to him. And, reconciling that within yourself. It often gets talked about as a twin flame card, and if you watch certain readings, since you're here on YouTube, and you're watching us, you might be watching readings on YouTube, and often in love readings it'll come out as, oh, it's twin flame. Not necessarily. It could be, depending on, or a twin flame type energy, depending on the cards that are next to it in combination. But I always see the lovers can be very much about duality within love, within yourself, within a choice you're making about love, or anything that has to do with creativity, with value, with your self worth, with your own self love. So.
There's also an element of it that, again, if you look at the orientation, it connects the left-hand pillar to the center pillar as it moves towards manifestation. And there's this whole idea with the lovers, too, that it's about surrendering the idea of self. So this is not where I'm going to sort of let my ego take over, and it's not about me. So it takes more of a supportive role or a giving role, but not because of weakness. It's not designed to the idea that I can't, do something because it connects to the center pillar. It's because I think by coming back to that idea of accepting or surrendering or supporting, giving, that it will serve the greater good. So that's really essentially what the lovers is. So it's not about, elevating the self. The right-hand pillar is all about that evolution or the elevating of self. Whereas the left-hand pillar, like I said, the lovers is about, me doing something supportive for someone else or giving to someone else or surrendering in some way, because I understand that that's going to be beneficial for me as well. It's going to benefit all of us. It serves the greater good.
It certainly could mean a relationship is coming your way, or a relationship that you're in is very good. Again, and just depending on what's next to it. Mm-hmm. It could indicate that the person you're with is making a choice about you or somebody else. Maybe.
Yeah, and the idea of it connecting to the center pillar, again, there is an element of partnership in that. It's all of us, so it does have that ability. It's not an individualistic card. Right-hand pillars tend to be individualistic. So cards like the lovers, you're right, it has a tendency, because it's not individualistic, to indicate partnership or groups. It doesn't have to be just an individual. It can be a collective. But it really does lack that individual aspect. And so you're absolutely right.
And I like the idea of the choice. I believe that too, that it can be also about a choice that you're looking at.
All right, so just to keep things moving along, because we have a lot of cards that we want to discuss, and I know time's going to go fast. Our favorite, the Tower. the blasted tower, the damn tower, you know. and to be honest, you know, when we read books in the tarot, the first thing we look at, Kristen and I, typically is the tower and the nine of swords to see if the person has any understanding what they're talking about. So I just want to kick this one off. The tower is Mars, and really there are three cards in the tarot that delineate the creative process: the Empress, the Strength card, and the Tower. Empress is desire, so things begin to happen when you discover that you have a desire for something. So it's that awareness of desire, and of course you have to know something exists to be desirous of it. So it's a little bit of both. The next stage is the Strength card, or lust, as Crowley calls it in his deck, which is to then establish one's intent. So is this important? Do I want to do it now? Do I want to do it later? How much energy do I intend to put into it? So we establish our intention. And then the last one is the Tower, which is to make effort or to go forth. And people read so much crap into this card about how it's destitute, or it's oblivion, and all my dreams are going to get shattered. That's not what it's about. It's the idea that once something has happened, it cannot be undone. A thought, if you decide not to pursue it, nothing changes. An intention, if you don't pursue it, nothing changes. But once something has happened, it can't unhappen. And Crowley uses this great example in his work somewhere, that you take a stone from a meadow in New England, you take it to France with you, to Paris for the weekend, and then you bring it back to New England, you put it in the same indentation in the same meadow. And he says, to the casual observer passing by, it will look like nothing has changed, but the stone will never forget that it was to Paris. So the stone can't be the same. You know, it can look the same, but it can never truly be the same. And that's really what the idea of the Tower is. And I always think of those Law and Order shows when someone will say, that person is a pedophile, and the judge will say, please disregard what you've heard to the jury. Well, good luck with that. You know, once the cat's out of the bag, you know, we can't pretend we didn't hear it, or we can't ever be not influenced by it. And that's really the idea of what the Tower is all about. But it's actually a very neutral card. It just means something is occurring, or something is happening. And whether it's a winner or loser, well, that's not what God decides. God just says something is happening, and that's your perspective, whether it's beneficial or not. But the Tower itself is a very neutral card.
And I'll explain why we came up with the idea of the Empress and the Strength card and the Tower being connected. They are, in the Kabbalah, they are the only horizontal cards in the tree, like a ladder, like a rung. And the Empress is at the top, and the Strength card and the Tower. And it really strikes you. You're like, wow, why are they like that? What is their relationship together? And it has many names. It was originally called Fire, I think. It's been called the lightning struck tower, the house of God. It's over time become a little more destructive, because I decided to go back and look at some of the early interpretations of the tower, and meaning early, like late 1800s and early 1900s. And I was really surprised by Paul Foster Case's interpretation. It's really close to ours. He talks about Mars, that it's connected to Mars, and that on an exoteric level, Mars is, can be kind of rash, and it's connected to war. But on a deeper level, it's how we act in life, and it's up to us to control our actions. And he calls it desire force, which is interesting because desire is the Empress. And he talks about, this is how I feel about the Tower. I call it the event horizon. Once you cross the Tower, you can't go backwards. And what he says is, once the chicken hatches, it can't go back into the egg. It's hatched. You can't. So let's say a simple example would be, that's not so dramatic. Let's say I decide to go back to school, and there's a card that shows the Tower and then the effect of my going back to school. And I go ahead and I enroll and I go to school. So once I'm in, take that action, I can't go back to the period before when I hadn't decided. It's had an effect on me. So I think the reason people get nervous with the Tower intuitively is they know that their actions have consequences. Even small ones can have big consequences. And that always, I think, makes us, we want to make sure we're doing the right things in our life. Is this the right action? And honestly, I agree with Michael. It is a neutral card. So what you would do is look and see sometimes the effect of the action, and seeing is it what they think it is? Are there some surprises? Does it take longer? So it's a neutral card. And I think that what bothers me the most about the Tower, it's never was literal. So either in the old books, they either see it as an allegory, the Tower of Babel. There's also one connected evidently to Saint Barbara, this whole story about Saint Barbara being locked up by her father because she wanted to convert to Christianity, and she was locked in a tower that had 2 windows, and then she made a 3rd window because the tower in a lot of depictions has 3 windows. So there's all this symbolism that really gets lost in modern tarot books. And which I think if you think of allegories and think about the message, you're going to come up with a different idea of the tower too, not as a destruction. One of my favorite ones is in the early book by Anton de Geblon. He calls it the House of Pluto. And evidently, there's this whole story of there being gold in this tower that's being basically protected from a thief. And there's a story about this king and this master thief. So it's had all these different allegories and stories associated with that throughout the time. And it really has never been destruction and ruin. And it isn't, by the way, always a big deal. So that's another thing. Once you've read enough, and you've seen the tower happen a lot, and their lives are not all like, whoa, every time the tower appears, because that's really not how our life is.
Well, change is difficult, any kind of change, even the smallest amount of change. So I think that that's why people, the tower can represent a neutral change, but to someone like, but I've had peanut butter and jelly every day for the last 20 years. What do you mean you want me to have tuna fish? That will really that can really upset someone, or something seemingly small and silly like that. So very often change is needed, but it's uncomfortable. So I think that that's part of the tower, is that very often things sometimes you need to, in order to advance in your career, you have to go back to school, and that means your life is going to have a change to it, because you may not be able to hang out with your friends as much. You may have less money because you have to pay for school. But in the end, it's something that's a very needed thing. So no, it doesn't have to be, absolutely not. But often in life, sometimes things do have to change, and the change can seem very challenging. It can seem like everything is being ripped up, and it's not bad at all. It's actually very, very necessary, and you're being pushed to have an event horizon by the universe in order to level up, to be happier, to get rid of something that's not serving you anymore, whether it be a person, place, or thing, or just to make some kind of change that is so uncomfortable to do that. Unless you're pushed to do it, you won't do it.
It sort of comes back to what Kristen was saying earlier, too, is that you really can't properly interpret one tarot card. It really is about the pattern. So the tower itself can indicate that something has occurred or is occurring. And then the rest of the cards will tell you your perspective on it. Is this something that you find beneficial or positive? Is it something that you feel is more to your detriment? But that's where you look at the whole pattern to sort of make that determination. The tower by itself as an individual card is very, very neutral. Something is occurring. Now, do you like it or not? Well, the pattern tells you that. So Kristen's right. I think that those people that suggest you should do one card readings, I don't believe you can learn the tarot that way, because I think it really is about interpreting patterns, and one card doesn't make a very good pattern.
Well, nature likes patterns, and it's really proven that the world is created through the patterns, geometry. Mm-hmm. And so the minimum I say is 3 cards to do a reading, to do not just a meditation. So yeah, maybe if I wanted to meditate on the cards through, mystery schools to study the symbolism, sure. But that's different. That's, you're just looking at an image like you would a painting, and getting some sort of message or meaning for you symbolically. But yeah, it's all about context with the tower, especially. I remember one time doing a reading for a woman. She had all 3 of the different cards, Empress, the Strength card, and the Tower, in different places, in different orders. And it's one of the most analytical readings I've ever done. And it had to do with these projects I felt. And so I sort of told her, well, I thought this one project was finishing up, and she was starting this other project, and I was going on about that. At the end, she said that it was more psychic than a psychic had ever been. And I thought that was really fascinating, and it really kind of convinced me that Kabbalah works, because that particular reading I felt was particularly analytical. I really just could see it logically, as if it was just an order, and I could figure a time frame out too. And it was really fascinating, and there was nothing really remotely dramatic about it, other than she could get a sense of what project was ready to go and what one was still in development, which is one of the things I love about Kabbalah. If you're working on creative things, and let's say you pick the Empress, you're still at a place of development, but that's kind of a different topic. But it's just fascinating how the Tower can be a perfectly benign card most of the time, to tell you the truth. It really can be. It's most people are not going to come. A lot of people have drama in their life, but it's not every year, and it's not every day. And so if you think of the real drama in our lives, where we lose someone suddenly, or we win the lottery, these don't happen that often. So you have to think about, if I'm doing readings on a regular basis, how is this going to work? Am I going to always have these dramatic remarks for people? It won't work.
Just to keep moving things along a little bit, because I know we have a lot of cards, and as I said, the hour is going to go fast. The next couple we'll look at, everybody's favorite, the Death and the Devil card. And I just going to kick this one off a little bit too, that the Death card, a lot of people think of it as a transition or change, but it's not really. And Krista found an obscure reference in a book somewhere that they translated the name wrong in English. And mortis was the root of the word from Latin, but it's supposed to be mortality. And the reason we're mortal is that time is precious. So whenever you have a deadline to meet, or you feel a sense of urgency to do something, and time is fleeting, that's essentially what the Death card is all about, is the recognition of time being short or impermanent. And it creates this urgency. So it's really the idea of the passion or the urgency, and that's a big part of that. Now the Devil, it's exact opposite. The Devil has all the time in the world to get what he wants, so it's a very patient card, persistent, still does things, but again, not driven the way the Death card is by this sense of panic or urgency. And ironically, the Devil card is the card of marriage. We're back to the idea of it connecting to the left-hand pillar again. So it's that idea of creating a pact or a bond or connection or commitment to something and sticking with it, so to speak. So it is that very persistent energy. And it has, like I said, this no rush, no hurry aspect to it. I have plenty of time, and I should, in theory, take my time with things. And then because it also connects to the left-hand pillar and it creates that commitment, the idea of thinking about long-term consequences with that card, is this something I truly want for the long term? Is this where I see myself 10 years from now? Whereas the Death card doesn't need that. The Death card is that more temporary or impermanent kind of energy. It just doesn't have that sort of lasting aspect to it. And so I think that those are my thoughts on it. So let's kick it over to Kristen for some of her thoughts.
Well, the Devil, interesting. It can be very much, I have found in readings, a pattern of behaviors, whether they be negative behaviors, addictive behaviors. And it very much can be about you self-imposing yourself to this, as opposed to something has happening to you. Or, there's this person is, if you're in a car, a relationship reading, well, this person is acting like the devil towards you. It could be that you're just connected to them and bound to them in a way that is not the most productive. But the devil could also be lust and passion and a kick-ass couple that's really into, but they're bound and they love it. They love being together in that way.
Yeah, and I think that the key there again is the passion. Do you love this energy? Is this what you really want? We keep coming back to that with the left-hand pillar stuff, and I think that's true. And I've often said the Devil card can give you a husband or a stalker, but either way, you're stuck with them once you get involved. Once you cross this boundary.
The other thing I find about in like a practical reading with the Devil is if someone gets the Devil, I have found, and they've been invested in their career for a long time, and say they have the Devil in a prominent position, I feel like sometimes people owe them favors because they've sort of worked a little more behind the scenes. The Devil, being part of the left-hand path, tends to give a little first, hoping it will get something in return. And so oftentimes it can be kind of a good, savvy political card, working behind the scenes. I also agree with Kristen that I have seen it in certain positions being habits and habitual, whether they're negative or positive patterns or habits. Maybe if it's in someone's conscious mind position, and we talk about it, and sometimes it can be habits people want to break, and sometimes it's fine, it's habits they really like.
Right.
It has, and maybe because of that patient element to it, that it's kind of a solid. It's Capricorn in the most decks that I follow. It's the sign of Capricorn, so that is very earthy, very grounded energy. Once in a blue moon, I have seen the archetype of the Devil come and represent fear, but that's different when a card comes out into the conscious social world as an archetype, and it's a collective energy. So it was right around sometime when Bush was in office. I was going through a period. I go through this period where I see these archetypes on the street, and I'm a street. I look at street art a lot, and I did see a lot of creepy devils. It was during there was some period. It wasn't 9/11, but it was some period where there was some really bad things happening. I remember.
Right.
And it was, people would walk by with devils on their shirts, and it felt like the collective was embracing this weird devil archetype. And it was just for about a year, and I thought, well, that's a whole different way of using the tarot in general. And by the way, that happened with Donald Trump when he was elected. I kept seeing the Dark Fool everywhere, and I knew it was him. I knew he was the Dark Fool, and I wish I'd posted about it, but it was really creepy too. It was like really creepy, full images everywhere, and it makes sense because that's what he's been like, his archetype. And then I just wanted to add to the death card that Michael, you'd forgotten to say. One of the things that Michael also observed, that because it's part of the right hand path and the death is sort of facing into the unknown, death is about embracing the unknown. And I like that because no matter what we say, we don't know what's going to happen when we die. So when you get the death card, it's like, come on, let's get going. We're going to go even though we don't know all the results. We're going to embrace it and take a chance. So it has an element of taking a risk to it, that card sometimes.
Yeah, and what Krista says is right, too. When you think about the right-hand pillar, and for those of you listening, it's cards like the 2s and the 4s, the 7s, the Hierophant, the Wheel. It's really about that delving into the unknown. As I said, that's what the future is. It's the unknown on the right-hand side. So it's that courage to take a chance, and that's really kind of what it's all about. So Krista's absolutely right. The death card has that tendency to say, let's just go for it and see what happens. Let's just jump into it and go from there. So it often is that sort of willingness to take a chance, and again, often driven by that sense of urgency.
And you may have to change something about yourself. You may have to have a change of consciousness. You may have to transform yourself in some way. You may have to unlearn a bad habit. You may have to change something, in order to feel free enough to do that and take that risk. And often people, that's what they struggle with.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that the death card is about sort of braving the unknown. So the idea that again, the devil card is that idea of sticking with the known. So, and how many times have you heard people say, well, this is the way I do things, and I don't really want to change. Whereas the death card,
the devil that you know versus
right.
the devil that you don't know, and so that's often it can be codependency in a relationship reading. It's just like you're kind of just people are just sort of toxically codependent, and the behaviors aren't necessarily negative. They could be just going through life doing the routine over and over and over again, but nobody's really happy, but they're bound to each other, and nobody really wants to leave because they're kind of afraid of what it would be like not to be together, even though it's not great together.
Right, and the left-hand pillar, again, one of the negative sides of it, and keep in mind, guys, that it's both positive and negative, but one of the negative aspects of it is the obsolete. And so that's kind of what Kristen's talking about, that idea that this is the way we've traditionally done things. It may not be healthy anymore, it may not be productive, but this is our habit, this is our way. And it's sort of stuck in that energy, so it really does have that aspect. So let's jump into the next one real quick, since, as I said, we're moving right along here. The next one, the 10 of Swords. And this is another one of my favorites where, again, it shows a guy usually laying on the ground dead with all these swords stuck in his back. And, of course, the literalists, the people that don't understand the philosophy, see this as a horrible card, and it's really not. In the weight deck, it actually shows, the storm lifting and the light breaking through. So it has both light and dark, or the storm developing. It depends on what direction the storm is moving. But really, the 10 of Swords, what it really means is that what friggin' more are we going to do to this guy? We've come to the end. There's nothing more. We've exhausted all of the different ways of doing things. So it's that completion, that final energy where, again, there's nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, and we've just come to the end. And that's essentially what all the 10s are, is the final manifestation or the final expenditure of energy. So with the swords to do. So it means there's nothing more that can be done. There's nothing more to do. And that's really all that card means. But again, people read, unfortunately, just a lot of negativity into it because of the image.
Well, it can be a very hopeful card, especially if there's been a lot of mental, mental confusion, mental frustration, not being able to take action, communication that's really, really just not good, not positive, negative. People are not being compassionate towards each other in their communication. They're not communicating. It can be like hopeful. It's done. There's nothing more to be done. It's over. You've reached the pinnacle of how bad it could possibly have gotten, perhaps, if that's what the rest of the cards are saying. But it really is, it's the ending and the beginning. So there's something new something new is coming up from this break.
It's true. And what's interesting about the weight deck is I looked at it again because I usually use the Crowley deck now, but all the swords hit on all the points on the spine. So it's definitely a very spiritual, like a Kundalini kind of energy. It's very deliberate. You can see the swords. His face is turned away. And then the hand, I have to admit, the hand has a strange gesture, so I'm sure it means something. It's a very esoteric card, even for the weight deck, I thought. And it's to me, again, the tens are part of the middle pillar. They are, in a sense, neutral in that, think about it, endings can be positive or negative.
Right.
It's all about context. And wouldn't it be great though? Sometimes I see somebody will have the Ten of Swords in their conscious mind. They're thinking about all the things they need to do to get to the end of something. So it can be something positive. Like, let's say I need to build this business, and these are all the things I need to do. These are all the actions in my mind that I know I need to accomplish my aim to get to the end. So this is where there's an art to looking at the combinations of the cards and getting clarification, adding cards if you need to clarify things because you're not quite sure.
Can absolutely be a hopeful card, 100%.
Yeah, I see it mostly as neutral because it's, in the Kabbalah, most people come to us because of predictions. Let's face it. You can go up the tree or down. When you're coming down the tree from ace to 10, everything's getting more and more solid. Even Crowley talks about it. Everything's becoming more involved in the matter. And so the 10 is just so enmeshed in matter, like there's nowhere else you can go. Like that's it. You can't say, oh, let's do the 11,
Right, right. Well, and
you have to go, like you said, the beginning. You have to go back to like a beginning card then,
right.
Like an ace. So then you go back and say, okay, I've done everything I could, so now I have to think of something new.
Well, and if someone's coming in, let's say, asking about their relationship and they get the Ten of Swords, it doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship is over. It could mean that there's like a new phase of the relationship coming up. Again, it depends on what the combinations of the cards are around it. But if you honestly were to get in a relationship reading the Devil, the Tower, and the Ten of Swords, I could see that as being, something not good was happening. I would think, well, this could possibly be great because that means that maybe whatever negative patterns were occurring or any sort of bondage that was not making someone happy or whatever was going on, that means something is coming through that it's going to end, for me personally. So, I mean, that's an example of how you can take 3 cards that you might be perceived as negative cards, and they could actually be something that's actually a fantastic reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump on to a couple more real quick because I know our hour's just flying by. One that Krista has wanted to talk about all evening is the Queen of Swords. And I think the court cards in general aren't that well understood by a lot of readers. And so I'm going to just kick this one over to Krista because she's been itching all night to talk about the Queen of Swords, I'm sure. So take it away, Krista.
I get really annoyed. There are whole forums about the Queen of Swords being a widow. And I have no idea, other than I think it came through the playing card interpretations of queens. It's ridiculous because there's nothing in any cards that indicates she's any more alone than any of the other queens. The queens all sit on thrones. The queens, sometimes you can't tell if they look happy or not. It depends on which deck you're using. In the Kabbalah, we see the queens as being as I said earlier, the threes and the queens in the Kabbalah, they actually are part of the same Sephirah in Kabbalah, they're the same consciousness. So the queens really have accomplished the understanding that the threes are seeking. They don't have the questions. So queens can be quite satisfied with whatever it is, whether they're satisfied with their life. The Queen of Swords is satisfied with what either things that have happened or her own thoughts. Or I see personally as a personality, I see all the queens can be manipulative. They're a little, because they're kind of a little more behind the scenes, the queens, just like a queen would be, and they can really manipulate well. I really love Crowley's interpretations of the personalities. I went back recently and reread them. He was evidently one of the first to not associate with the court cards with individual people. And they can represent people, but that's not really what they are. Like, depending on the position, they can represent a person. That's just one aspect. So he talks about them more as psychological profiles, and he gets really into it. Some of it's really funny, and it's very complex, and there's both positive and negatives about the queen. But the thing that bothers me the most is, why do people think that she's alone, that she's a widow? There's nothing in the weight deck. Crowley, okay, she's got this like head that she's got, holding, that's a severed head in one of her hands. But what I wanted to read for Crawley's Queen of Swords, what he says about it, I was going to read, it's just like one line. And I love Crawley's interpretations in general of the court cards. He says that the queen is the clear, conscious perception of idea, the liberator of mind. And then, of course, he does go into if this is a person, these are her characteristics, and these are the positive, and these are the negative. And so they all have positive and negative characteristics. So that's been, I used to, when I first started, I felt the Queen of Swords had this kind of autonomy for me. And that was my own personal view of the card. I always felt like she was a woman. She, for whatever reason, she always reminded me of my English teacher. And I loved my English teacher. She was this amazing African-American woman who was brilliant and funny, and she had poetry memorized. And even though she was married happily, I never really saw her as a married woman. She was so much her own person, and she had a daughter, and she was very happy with her family. And I always see the Queen of Swords as being, to me, kind of brilliant mentally, someone that can be very sharp-witted in their mind and sarcastic and have a good memory. And so that, after a while, you might get some of your own feelings about the cards. But it's in the beginning, I kind of saw her as an autonomous woman who isn't defined by a marriage. And even now, I don't know if I'd agree with that, but it wasn't that idea that she is a widower
or you hear often the divorced woman as well.
Yeah, and that any of the queens can be in a relationship, or it's possible, sure, they could have had a relationship, they could have, outlived a relationship, but even then they wouldn't be unhappy. To me, the queens are not unhappy cards. They've accepted things, they've embraced life, they're complex, they can handle different emotions. So if she, or even a queen could be a man, that person is still not necessarily unhappy. So that was my main thing with the Queen of Swords, is why do people think that about her? I don't know. I've never thought that, even before the Kabbalah.
Just to jump in again, we got maybe time for one more, but I kind of wanted to mention people too, just before we do wrap up. Obviously, Kristen and I do professional readings, so if that's something you guys are interested in, go to the Sixth Sense Society website, sixthsensesociety.com, and it's SIXTH, it's all spelled out, not the number 6. And that you can link back to our main websites that we all have from there. And we also do some instructions, so if you want to learn tarot, then we're happy to figure out if that's something we do. Normally, I know with Kristen and I that we generally do private students as opposed to group classes and stuff like that these days. And we're actually putting together some online instruction, which hopefully somewhere in the near future we'll have ready. But definitely, we love tarot. And if you love tarot, or even if you just have questions, reach out to us. And we'd be happy to talk to you. We have time probably for one more anyway before we wrap up. So one of the ones that I think is, again, very misunderstood, the moon card. And the thing I find with the moon card, people talk about lunacy and deception and all these things in the books. And that's not kind of really what it's about. The moon illuminates. So it's the idea of to come to truth again. To come to realization and to see things for what it is. So we discover the truth. Now, again, it's taken that risk. It's the completion of the fool's journey. I've taken the chance, and now I realize what this is all about. So it's that recognition or that realization that's important in it. And Crowley actually talks about it in a very funny way in his book. And he goes into the same archetypal stuff or stereotypical stuff, I should say, that all the other people do, that it's lunacy and it's madness and it's folly and it's crazy. But then he says, but oh, the adventure, and I always love that, the idea that this is about, I've taken a chance, and now it may have worked, it may have not worked, but now I know. And it's coming to that realization through, as I said, risk and chance. And that's essentially what it is, but it's really about truth. And the reason it can't be deception is you don't know you've been deceived unless you know the truth. So in order to spot deception, you would have to see the truth. And so it is about the uncovering of truth. It's not about, being deceived. And so I'll kick it back to you guys.
And the reason Michael talked about it being the end of the fool's journey, again, it's Kabbalistically speaking. So the fool is at the top of the right-hand pillar and the moon's at the bottom. So it literally is a culmination of a path. And again, there's definitely some other meanings of it, but that was the reason why Michael said that.
It's very interesting. When I think of the moon as well as all these other interpretations, I always think there's something mysterious. Because, I always think of the moon, it's in the evening, at night, in the darkness. What's happening that we don't know about? It's always a little bit romantic. And I know it's not, the the traditional, but there's something also romantic and mysterious and a little erotic about the moon card, as well as emotional. So it absolutely is about truth and absolutely about illumination and illumination coming in. But yeah, I always think of the crab there with Cancer, and it's a very psychic card to me as well. So again, I hate to keep saying it depends on what's next to it, but it really does depend on what's next to it.
Well, I think that's very fair to say that because they are referring to the moon. Just as the sun card, they really are referring to the sun card. And you can use lunar interpretations as well for the moon, I think quite successfully at times. And there's something beautiful, mysterious about the depiction of the moon card. If you looking at it, it does evoke that, the adventure, that.
Right. What's going on? I always think of being in New York City in my 20s, like going out at 10 o'clock at night, and it's one of those things where it really is what the card kind of also means to the reader, because you'll often see readers saying, well, in my deck, this card has this slant to it. So we can talk about this. But when it comes down to it, when I think of, sometimes when I see the moon, I think of, well, what happened at midnight when I went out at 10 o'clock in New York City? It's the mystery. It's like, often things do get illuminated in the darkness when you're out, and you're out in the unknown. So I just wanted to put that out there, because sometimes that does ring true for me, again, depending on what the question is, who the client is, and what cards are around it.
And also the idea of just marching to your own drum, doing things your own way, and not, and in the right hand pillar, in the positive aspect, it's all about creativity and individualism and all of that kind of innovation, big part of that. If it's negative, then it becomes anarchy, and narcissism and all those kind of things too. So as I said, the cards do have both positive and negative connotation. But again, imagine a world where nobody wanted to do something different, and essentially that's what the moon is the willingness to be your own person, to do something completely different.
You think of going to the moon, we never thought we would get a man on the moon, right? So that's what reminding me of. Sure. Innovation.
Well, Michael once pointed out, too, that if you wanted to stand out, say you wanted a card that shows you stand out in the deck, there are many stars, but there's only one moon in the sky.
Oh, yeah.
And that can be a very powerful visual card, so people can notice you if you have it in a certain place. Now, this could be positive or negative. If I'm a thief and I get the moon card, someone might catch me.
Right.
If I
could be revealed.
Exactly. There are some cards I tell people sometimes for fun. I'll say, look, don't rush through traffic. You're going to get caught, because you can tell they're visual, and then you can sometimes see people are rushing by their cards, and they'll go, oh yeah, I do. I speed. So I say, well, you're going to get caught if you do, or at least the probability is you'll get caught, I usually say. So the moon kind of stands out for that reason as well. I do find the moon can be definitely, it's part of the right-hand path, can be a little compulsive, and sometimes trying to force things, obsessive, and it's very passionate. That's how I view it. That right-hand path's very passionate, and maybe because it's really trying to pursue what I want as a person in life. And these are the things that are important to me, whether they are to anybody else. So for me, it's that as well. So I think that covers at least a good amount of the ones we wanted to cover tonight. There are a few others, like we have talked about the eights in the past. Like, interesting enough, the Eight of Cups in the original early versions was a card of victory. I didn't know that. And now it's not at all like that in the traditional tarot book. So it's interesting.
It depends on, you could be walking towards something that you want to be, or you could be leaving something when you don't want to be leaving. It just depends,
But it's part of that sort of left-hand pillar where there can be cards of acceptance or letting go. And so that there's more to say, absolutely, even about some of the more nuanced cards that aren't quite as obviously misunderstood. The main advice I would give anyone, please, please do not read it literally. Do not look at the judgment card and say, people are judging you. I've heard that, believe it or not.
Or with the court cards, like let's say that you're in a relationship reading and you want to know about a guy and he's an Aries, and then this water sign keeps coming up. Oh my God, that means I'm not going to meet, it's not him. It could be his qualities that are coming out with the King of Cups, so it doesn't have to be like, oh my God, another person. No, just, again, it has to be literal.
Right. So thank you again for joining us. Please like us, subscribe. We love your comments. We try to get back to them as soon as possible. and enjoy your week. We will be back. Well, we won't be back. We're going to pre-record the next show, but there'll be next show next week with Olivier on Signs and Synchronicity. So have a great week.